Guys, so in this video I'm going to be making a bite block. Bite blocks are not the easiest thing to learn, however with a bit of practice they are quite fun to do. I think a great project for any dentist that wants to do a little bit more of their own work when it comes to making dentures, but they're particularly good for dental nurses because it's within their scope of practice. Sorry about the sound quality in here. So if you've got a nurse who does want to learn how to do bite blocks, you can show her this video. It's a good starter video. Now there's a lot more into making bite blocks than just what I'm going to do today, but I can always do a full kind of course for making bite blocks. It's just not something that I've done at the moment. I'm still in the stages of finding out the courses that people want me to do first. If a nurse is to do a bite block, it's not really ideal to do it in the clinic, in a clinical environment, because it can get a little bit messy. But if you've got a little side room somewhere, it doesn't need to be very big. I mean, this is a tiny space here that we've got. It's just somewhere where we can sit down. I can use it just to do some simple repairs or a bite block or special tray if I need it, rather than send it out to the lab. Somewhere I can just sit down and do a little bit of work. And you don't need many tools to make a bite block either. So all I've got is a wax knife. This is a tiny wax knife. You need a little bit of wire, some pliers to cut the wire. You do need a bottle warmer to soften the wax, and you also need an induction heater to get your knife hot. And it's always a good idea when you're dealing with hot wax is to have a bowl of water or a tap ready just to cool you down if you do burn yourself. First of all, we need to prep the model, and after it's been trimmed, sometimes you get these edges. By the way, nurses can cast impressions as well. Again, it's something within the scope of practice, as long as they're competent and have got experience. And again, that is something that I could do. I could put together a course for casting impressions, if that's something people are interested in. For these purposes, we'll just assume that you've already got a model. I'll just tidy that up with a brush. So all we need is a wax knife. This isn't a very good wax knife, it's tiny. So I've prepped the model. Now the next thing you want to do is just have a little look at the bite, and you won't know the bite, which is the whole point of the bite block, but we can get a guide. We can see roughly where the teeth are going to meet. So if you look at that, you can sort of gauge where those lower teeth are going to go, and that will give us an idea of the height of the bite block. Now what a lot of technicians do, they make the mistake of making the bite block the same height as the teeth. Really, you want it just shy of the height of the teeth, because the registration block, if you do it the same height as the teeth, then the bite's going to be really open, and we're going to have to close it right down in order to get the correct bite, and that ends up being too much wax. It takes us too long in the clinic then to do a bite registration, so we're better off doing one that's a little bit short, and then we're just using a wax squash bite in clinic to build up any of that shortness, and it makes it so much easier to take the bite registration. Typically what I'll have to do when I'm doing the bite registration, first thing is just chop a load of the wax off the bite block, just because it's been made too big. The next thing you want to do is just mark on the model. Now I tend not to do this because I've been making bite blocks for so many years, I know what I'm doing, but if you're new making bite blocks, it really helps to just draw on the model where you want the bite block. I've just drawn the outline, and that helps because once you cover the model with wax, you then can't see the anatomy. But if you've drawn a little line on there, then you'll be able to see that through the wax. Cut off a piece that's going to be big enough, put it in the bottle warmer, and now what I'm going to do is cut off a bit which is long enough. So taking the long side, you're gauging it roughly so that you've got the same length. If you imagine that's going to be shaped to the arch, that's how much we want. It's better to have a bit that's too big than too small. With this one that's just been softened already, we push it in, and when we're pushing it in, what we're trying to do is get the wax right into all the little details of the plaster. So you need to push it in as hard as you can, but without snapping any of the teeth off. Once we've done that, we can then just heat the knife a little bit and then just score around that line that you made. Now, another thing with base plates, quite often they're overextended, and an overextended base plate is going to cause problems. An underextended base plate isn't. If it's too small, it doesn't matter. If it's too big, it does matter. So if you're unsure on how big to do the base plate, just do it smaller rather than larger. And what I mean by that is particularly around areas like the frenums, where there's going to be interference in the mouth. If it's a little bit short, it doesn't matter. And what we're trying to do at this stage is fabricate a base plate, is cover enough area to make the bite block nice and stable in the mouth. Now, it's come off a little bit, which happens once you've gone round it. What I like to do is just soften it again, not for very long, just pop it back in the water, warm it up, bring it back onto the model, and then just adapt it back down into position. And you're sort of holding it with one hand while the other hand's pushing it into all those little nooks and crannies. There we go. Right, now, next thing we need is to strengthen this bite block. Popular mistake is that the strengthener is put on top of the ridge. That can cause problems. If you imagine I've put this strengthener in here, and now I'm going to register the bite, and the patient's teeth are right up close against the gum, like this one, and you put the wire right on top of the ridge where the teeth are going to go, that is going to cause a problem with me in clinic trying to register the bite. So we want to set it back into the palate, so probably about there. So we just snip that little bit of wire off. When you're cutting wire, you're holding the bit that you're cutting off as well as the bit that you're cutting, so that this bit doesn't fly up and stick in your face or somebody else's. In order to get this wire to go in here, we just want to bend it to shape, get it in the rough sort of position, push it into the wax a little bit, and then with our wax knife and the little bit of wax that we didn't use before, we'll just heat that knife up, and then we'll just drop some wax on and run it round just so it's holding that little strengthener in place. And it's only enough just to tack it in place. Another thing that people do is they heat that up, then they melt it into the wax, and then the problem is that it goes right through, and then it ends up sticking out the other side of the bite block when we're trying to register the bite. So we want it inside the wax, not melted through. Bit of wax I had in the bottle warmer. I'm just going to roll that up now, and you want to try and do this without getting too much air in. And the reason for that is any air bubbles will cool down at a different rate, and then it will all ripple and get distorted as it cools down. And what we're doing is we're trying to shape it as if it was the teeth in the patient's mouth, and that little extra bit there, just heat the knife up, chop it off at an angle, and then have a little look at the arch. So you want to look at it head on and make sure that it's following the arch round. The bite block on the sides needs to sit on top of the ridge, and then at the front it just slightly sits proud of the ridge. And this wax is soft and will stay soft for quite a long time, which gives you plenty of time to manipulate it. The other thing we need to do is get it about the same height as the teeth on that side. If you remember what we said about taking the bite, this is going to be a difficult one because those lower teeth have erupted and they're going to be right into the patient's palate. Pushing it down, moulding it to where I want it. I usually get a piece of paper or paper towel tissue for when I'm melting this bite block. I'll do the inside first, so we just heat it up, and you're holding the model at the right angle so that as the wax melts, you're flowing it around to hold that wax strengthener in place. And to thicken up the palette a little bit, to give it a little bit more strength. So I've gone round like that. This is not a very good knife, by the way. It's got a curved blade on this side. Ideally you want a knife with a flat blade, but I like a challenge, so right, let's just get some tissue on that. And now we're going to go around the front. And just notice how thick this bite block is as well. Again, quite often bite blocks are made really wide and you don't need them very wide. And always be conscious of the angle of the model and where the wax is going to drip, because I've just managed to drip a bit on my finger there, look. And this is where your cold water comes in, because if you do drip it and it's very hot, it's going to blister very quickly. So having that cold water, if you do drip it on your hands, don't try and rub it off, just get it in the cold water as soon as you can. If you try and rub it off, it's just going to take the skin with it, probably burn your other finger. So just be careful where it's dripping, and if you're doing this for the first time, you will burn your hands, trust me. You will get molten wax dripping onto your fingers at some point. Okay, so I'm just heating the wax, shaping the block to where I want it, and then I tend to do the height of the bite block last. And this is probably the trickiest bit, is getting this level, but it doesn't need to be perfect. When I take this bite registration, I'll probably be putting a squash bite on it. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But you're just running it over like that, just trying to get it nice and flat and just a little bit shorter than the teeth. And this is the bit that takes a lot of practice, just getting used to where the wax will flow. And then I'm just going to thin this out. Now, this is almost good to go. It's a little bit thin in the palette, and this is where I'm going to really struggle with this silly little knife. Ideally what you want to do is scoop up a bit of wax, heat your knife up in the induction heater, and then you just lay it on and just spread the wax out a little bit. But it's really important to do this bit with a hot knife. If your knife isn't hot enough, what will happen is you'll end up introducing air and it will look really messy, which isn't the end of the world. Okay? The most important for this is to function. And this induction heater isn't very good, by the way. There's one called a no flame or non-flame, something like that. Much better. This one, it gets hot, but you have to hold it right at the top, and it doesn't always turn on. And it's really noisy as well, but it's cheap, so it's a good starting one. There we go, I've built that up. Now what we need to do is just let it cool down. Now we can cool it down in water. One thing you need to be careful with water and using a hot wax is it can spit and splatter if you've got water on the wax. When you're heating the wax up, it will spit and explode, and you'll get little droplets of wax spraying everywhere. So then we just take it off and then just smooth off all the little bits of wax. I started it, but this has probably taken me about 10 minutes. With practice, you can easily do one in 10 minutes. When you first start, it might take you 20 minutes, half an hour, maybe even an hour, depending on how difficult the case is. But that's good enough to go. What I would normally do at this stage is then just flame it over with a little pin flame, like this. And again, you're just being very mindful of how much of the wax you're melting, and that it's not going to drip all over. So you just want to lightly flick over. Now, You don't need to do this. It makes the bite block look pretty, but it's not actually going to affect anything that you're doing in clinic in terms of using it. But that's it. I usually then, once I've flamed it over, I'll just go in once more with the knife just across the top there, just to flatten it and put a nice edge on it. And that's it. Bite block. Well, I hope you found that useful. As I say, not for everyone, bite blocks, but it's a great little extra skill that a nurse can do to help streamline things in the clinic a little bit more. Particularly useful if you've got a patient that needs a temporary denture and it needs to be made quickly and you need to take a bite registration as quick as possible, and so you can get those teeth extracted and you can get the denture made quicker. And if the patient's only got a few teeth left, you can take an impression, cast it up, do the bite registration, and the nurse can do all that if you've got a little room for her to do it, and then you can register the bite and get cracking with that temporary denture sooner rather than later. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope that was useful to you, and I will see you in the next one.